Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Bronwyn Edwards and I'm joined today by Lindy Zillman. We're here today to present to you the first feedback loop from the New South Wales Ministry of Health post-suicide support co-design process. So everything that you see today and some extra information will all be included in the online survey, and there'll be a link to that at the end of this webinar. And we will make sure that we distribute that through all our channels and have it on our website as well, so that you can take part in that survey. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today, pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge people with a lived experience of suicide. So of course, those who have been bereaved by suicide, who are at the centre of this particular project, but also to acknowledge those people who have suicidal thoughts, experienced suicidal crisis, may have made an attempt on their life, and for those people who care for people that they love in crisis as well. So thank you to all of those people with lived experience who have taken part so far, as well as the postvention workers that we've had the pleasure of meeting and talking to as well in the process to date. So I am going to share my screen, and we're going to start running through the slides to show you, share with you the outputs of the focus group conversations and the group co-design sessions that we have been running. All right, so this particular feedback loop is going to provide you with a summary of lived experience focus group conversations, so groups, small groups of 3 and 4, where we explored emotions and feelings throughout their particular suicide bereavement experience. Focus group conversations with postvention workers, so people who work to support people who've been bereaved by suicide, and once again exploring their emotions and feelings at the various periods of time and touch points with the people that they support. We then also brought all of the lived experience people together for a group session, and that's where we really explored what their needs were that sat underneath those emotions and feelings, and what were their ideas on how those needs could be met by this New South Wales post-suicide support service. And then we had the same conversations with all of our postvention workers who came together in a group scenario as well. So our intent for this feedback loop is firstly to sense check what we've heard, make sure that people who've participated to date, that we've got it right, and that you have an opportunity to add anything more that has come to mind since those sessions. It's also to circulate this far and wide now. So anyone who is part of this today and anyone who's been part of the process so far, please share this with all of your networks. We want to hear from the wider community around the same questions that we've been asking over the last few weeks. That written feedback can be provided via an online survey, as I mentioned, and it will also help inform the following parts of this co-design process, which include a combined session, as well as some local visits to community. So in summary of the lived experience focus group conversations, we initially spoke with the groups and we asked them to reflect on various touch points in their journey. The day that they learned about their loss of suicide, the first few days after that loss leading into the funeral, 2 to 3 weeks after the loss, 4 to 6 months after, at those first anniversary and other significant dates, what were they feeling at that time? And today, and when we mean today, it was just really any other day beyond that 12-month period where your lived experience just surfaces, and what does that feel like? So they were the areas that we explored together. So the first one here, Lindy and I are going to just tag team here and take you through some of the content. We won't read it all verbatim because there is a lot. It's really rich and meaningful material, but please do go onto the online survey and you can read all of these slides in full. So first of all, the day that you learn of your loss through suicide, key themes that came out of those discussions are those feelings of being absolutely overwhelmed, alone and sad, quite isolated and alienated, disempowered and uninformed. A number of people spoke about just not knowing what was going on and what had to happen. Those more complex emotions of self-blame, responsibility, regret and helplessness, being in a state of shock, and a sense of being dismissed by people around them who thought they were protecting them. Just to pull out sort of one of those comments there. So last contact had been within 2 days of losing them. There was disbelief and regret, helplessness. How do we support their partner while putting our own grief aside? And that was a comment made by friends of someone who had lost a great friend to suicide, and they were in that situation of how do they support the family, and yet they're also dealing with their own very intense grief. Over to you, Lindy.
So the next touch point that we looked at was the first few days after the loss and leading into the funeral. So again, a lot of comments about grieving and being around others and just a numbingness of pain. Some people commented on just having to put on a brave face, build up of emotions, anxiety, panic, and being unable to speak about anything or about what had happened with others. Sadness in other family members, feeling numb, again that word numb, and the situation just being surreal. There were people talked about anger, hurt and grief, lack of control or involvement, and again inclusion, and some people commented specifically about that lack of involvement or inclusion leading up to the funeral with the planning and the organisation. Implicit blame for the bereaved and the feeling of guilt within the family and friends that this had happened and they weren't aware. Uninformed about the funeral process. A process was rushed and no space to say goodbye. Interestingly, the confusion about what even to feel. I don't know what to feel about this. One of the comments that I'll refer to in detail was moments of complete numbness and earth-shattering pain, feeling build up and I couldn't breathe, swallow or eat. I could feel all of this stuff in me. I don't know what it is, what's happening, not able to cry. Then it would seem it would all spill out. An expression of grief. The moments before that in the build up and not being able to express what was going on, it was frightening. And the other one that I think is relevant here is I didn't know anything about the process, even the funeral, bewilderment, and no one explained anything, and sort of like questioning themselves, is that it now? Thanks, Bonnie.
In the 2 to 3 weeks after the loss, the key themes that were coming out were a guilt for feeling any joy or happiness. And I think that's one of those really complex things the group actually unpacked a bit in terms of you're in this incredible intense grief, and yet if something funny happened and it was funny and you wanted to laugh, or a memory that made you laugh, there was guilt for feeling like that, and that was very confusing. Disconnected and feeling that others were just not able to understand, sense of not being in control, feeling like they had to suppress some of that grief and intense pain. The practical tasks highlighted here, just being overwhelmed by everything that has to be done in terms of closing down car loans and bank accounts and having death certificates certified and all of that. Obsessing over the whys and what ifs, disjointed sleep and nightmares, and that real sense of loneliness as the support from others started to dissipate. So that conversation around how life for everyone else starts to move ahead and life for you is still very much stopped. Felt a lot of frustration around organising things that had to get done, super, life insurance, car loan. When people put up barriers to doing that, people had to prove they were the next of kin, and it felt like you had to fight for everything was some of the comment that was made. In terms of other comments, from what I can remember, the initial shock wore off and reality set in. I had blame towards the mental health system as it was a needless thing to happen. I felt isolated.
So the next touch point that we looked at was 4 to 6 months after the loss. Had anything really changed? How were people feeling at this particular time? having lost their loved one or their friend or whoever. Feeling miserable and still in a state of disbelief, so that feeling of surrealness continued, still putting on a brave face for other celebrations and events that occurred within the family or around them. Interestingly, feeling of being disowned by friends and impact on lifelong relationships. There was comment that support from family members helped. It felt unnatural seeking help, for example, from counsellors, and a difficulty in engaging with the right professional people who could assist with their feelings and in bereavement. For some, seeing a psychologist helped in validating their feelings that they had at that time. Accessing support from groups they found did help some. And again, that ongoing feeling of, I don't know if I could be really joyful or happy at this time with what's happened. Guilt and rejection, the feeling that they weren't enough for the person who had passed. Also alone again, still disconnected and repeatedly having to tell the story to professionals if they did try and seek that support. One of the comments that really stands out, aloneness, how can anyone understand? I had friends that also loved my brother, so they were grieving also, though I still didn't really feel that they understood. So there's that ongoing disconnect and ongoing not knowing or feeling that they knew how to feel or what to do.
Sorry, I'm just trying to click through. Okay, so then we talked about that first anniversary and other special significant events like birthdays, Christmases, Mother's, Father's Day, wedding anniversaries, those sorts of things. Key themes that came out for some people, I just didn't allow myself to feel anything for the first ones. It was just like, it's just too hard. Experience the build-up in the month leading into it, and that the build-up was worse than the day itself. A very surreal experience as well, feeling very lonely and agitated and frustrated on those particular dates, like Christmas, an onset of problematic alcohol consumption. But then others spoke about very deliberately reframing birthdays, anniversaries as a time to celebrate life and celebrate the person's life that they'd lost. Comment-wise, this was fairly universal. First few years, I was numbed out. Don't remember the first ones, didn't allow myself to feel anything. I was in protective mode. I got a job, worked as much as I could, and it saved me. I try to look and remember the good times and try to celebrate the silly things we did in the good times. Be thankful we had the time to spend with them. Try to keep in mind we don't want others to experience the same thing.
So the next touch point that we looked at was really like today, or any day after that 12-month period. And so there's just how things evolve and how they feel at various times in today's context. So some people spoke of being able to change their environment to escape or support escaping the situation. That there is a build-up that still happens every year, particularly around anniversary times, a numbness around the anniversary, constant reminders everywhere, whether it be music or seeing someone in a uniform if their partner they had lost had been in uniform, behaviours, aftershave, so real sensory impacts, permission to experience whatever feelings arise. They felt they had to make that an ongoing conscious decision that it's okay to feel whatever I'm feeling, whether it's joy or grief. There was still a lifelong impact of a lack of understanding from others about that lifelong impact of the death and the impact of suicide. And some participants spoke about the impact on their ability to maintain or engage in long-term relationships or even short-term. Some noted an increased anger over time. And that just the fact that at times they could be hit with grief at a random time when they were unexpected. Some mentioned a little bit of a blindside, being hit with something that was unexpected, shocked and taken aback with a feeling of, oh shit moment, very emotional. Sometimes it can be deep sadness, seeing the uniform that he used to wear for his work, music, things that he liked, his footy team, things that the kids do that are like his old habits. And then one participant or a couple express similar things, like ensuring that I have a sense of control and get in touch with my feelings and self-compassion, knowing it is okay to have whatever feelings I'm having. This has allowed me to feel freer and not judged by others.
So then we had a series of focus group conversations with people who are actually working in postvention, so working to support people who've been bereaved by suicide. And this is one of the stakeholder groups that are really important to engage in this co-design process. When we move into the local co-design workshops around New South Wales, we'll be engaging a wider range of stakeholders, including first responders and sports coaches and schools and other people working in different services in community. But in these sessions, it was just people working in postvention. What we asked them about was to reflect on the day that they either attended the scene of a suicide and were then supporting family members, or whether they were advised of a death by suicide, that first time that they came into contact with the people that they were supporting who'd been left behind. Then the immediate weeks following the suicide, 12 months after the loss, times when they too are blindsided by memories or emotions, and the intersection of work and personal life. How did that play out for them? So on the day that they were advised, became aware of the death by suicide, the key themes were that really important to build a relationship with the affected family. Quite a bit of anxiety for some, caused by the call, coming in knowing that, really being able to empathise so deeply with the pain that the family and friends and community were now experiencing. Anxiety also caused for the postvention workers when there were differences in family responses, family dynamics. It can be quite a tricky landscape to navigate for them and support the different needs. Making sure that they address the most appropriate person to help navigate through that process. They spoke about needing to be very self-aware of the impact of the suicide on their own emotions, and particularly a couple of the members who are from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community and who support those same communities. It's not uncommon at all for them to actually know the family or friends and the community in which someone has passed. And that has obviously it adds a significant additional layer to what they're feeling. Those affected are often frustrated with the system failure, but they also spoke about, this is their role to go in and support. And so there is this ability that they talked about of being able to go into that mode of, I'm here to support you, how can I best help right now for you? And it was really coming in with incredible compassion, but also a professionalism to think, right, how do I help and assist in this situation? In terms of a couple of comments, sadness, compassion, what does the person need? How can I be of help? Have they got support? And I go into research mode. So really trying to find out what else is around this family, what other scaffoldings can we put in to support them? A sense of powerlessness when people talk about the system failure. We wonder, when are we ever going to get it right? There is a sense of, I'm hearing this again.
So the next touch point that we looked at were the immediate weeks following the suicide itself. And a lot of the support workers commented on things like maintaining that sense of real grief for the family themselves, that they were, wanting to change what had happened for that family, knowing what they were in for over time, and a real sense of trying to be the person that they could fall back on as a support person. They spoke about having to set boundaries around how much they could think about the families, particularly after they've left for the day or at the end of the day. And a lot commented that those boundaries were really important. They also acknowledged that being there just to help the family was often just enough, just being there, just being someone that they could talk to, and acknowledging that the early months were the tough ones for families, are very tough. Again, that sense of sadness that something for that particular family had changed forever. And there was also another sort of layer to it, particularly for the support workers who worked in areas of small communities where they often knew people within that community themselves. Achievement, when you're going, a sense of achievement when going through the process and being able to link the families to other supports. But there was always a sense of questioning within themselves, have I done this role properly? Am I doing the right thing? Have I done enough? There were comments that the subsequent conversations over time became a little easier. But again, it was difficult when particular family members had different views on the suicide or what needed to be done, or that when there was conflict within the family and even the hierarchy within some families. There was a need that they felt to turn towards their own support, and some relief for some, particularly when they could start to see that a family had started to benefit from the support that they had offered. One of the pertinent comments was, when I was new in the role, I had a feeling of hopelessness because you can't change what had happened. You can't change the extreme grief for them. I learned that being there is enough, being in the crisis, the trauma and the pain for them. When you're in postvention, hope is gone for the people. And another important comment that was made, it's incredibly raw for people that maintains for many weeks, especially when family members have different views or conflict arises after responding to different groups of people with different relationships with the person. And that was that context or that layer where not everyone is feeling the same, and being able to balance and manage those differing responses and feelings within the family and friends.
12 months after the suicide loss, key themes for the people working in this space were they absolutely still felt very deeply for the family and recognised what a difficult time it was. Realising that there is a potential risk of more suicides in the family, and most definitely the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers shared this with us. It's always front of mind for them, but of course it is relevant across all communities as well. Sometimes can get drawn into people's helplessness. Once again, unsure if they're doing enough. Am I saying the right things? It's for some people, it was difficult if they didn't actually know what had happened down the track, whereas others are very comfortable to support, and then once the family don't need them anymore and they've been connected to other services, that was okay for them to sort of work towards the next family that they were looking to support. A comment around that they think at the 12-month mark, the reality really kicks in for families, and there's a different level of support that is still required by many of them. In terms of a comment, sometimes people bereaved through suicide, they go through some strong feelings of deep sadness, depression, and I find sometimes getting drawn into their helplessness. And the process often lets them down even when they want to. It's frustrating. It gets too long-winded for them and then they give up. They need more outreach services to offer bereavement support, helping with mental health assessments, or just what sort of support do they need at home, explaining to people what's available, and explaining mental health just in terms of bringing the mind back to be emotionally healthy again.
We then went on to talk about times when some of the workers were blindsided by memories or emotions that perhaps they weren't expecting. And one of the sort of, there were a few things that sort of permeated through their responses, and that was a real sense of responsibility in remembering anniversaries for families that they'd been supporting. And, you know, really feeling that that was the time when they needed to remember and needed to be there and just to reach out to see how the family was going. And with that often came that ongoing thought process about what they could do better, and feeling guilty for the family pain. Relating to the affected family in any way, they felt that sometimes they could be just remembering things or blindsided by something that reminded them of the time that they went and how to see the family and how that then related to them in their own personal life. When people affected reach out and the unexpected nature of when this can be, often they can feel a little bit taken aback. Sometimes feelings of guilt or just sadness that they're unable to support people. And also that there were many comments about that constant reminders or memories such as the songs, the smells or the word, because they could relate to it perhaps at the time of when the suicide occurred and they started supporting, or when they maybe heard a song on the radio going to that particular time and then hearing it again later down the track. So, but they also talked about that there were good and bad reminders for them that popped up. One of the really powerful comments that came through for some of the workers, not all, but there was the unexpected element. Once you work in this space, people always call you. It can happen at any moment. Sometimes, not all the time, but feeling of angst and wanting to say no. For example, I'm on holiday, but knowing that I need to step into my role and to be able to support. So there was a lot of pressure that they put on themselves to be able to support, even at times when they were trying to perhaps have personal time. And one of the other interesting comments was, if a person died by if the person that had died by suicide is similar age to my children, when sitting with parents who have lost a child to suicide, a little guilt comes through that my child is still alive. So the impact for workers is also obvious.
We then wanted to just explore a little bit about that intersection between work and personal life. And I think some of the comments made in the previous section that Lindy's just been through also relate here. It is a challenge to separate the two, was what we were told. And living and working in the small communities makes it feel like they're always working, they're always on call. That guilt around if their family is unaffected by suicide, but also feeling incredibly protective of their own family and their own time outside of work. A lot of discussion around how important that supervision and additional support and debrief is just so helpful. And many people have their own little rituals to get out of work mode, things that really work for them and help them to symbolically leave the day behind. But there's an understanding that there's always going to be spillover from work into my personal life, and knowing where those safe places are for them to be able to move through those. I look after myself when this happens. I connect to myself, get in my PJs, wash away the stuff under the shower, using tools to represent leaving the emotion at work. Just sit with it, know it will go away when it's time. So the next thing that happened in the co-design process was that we then brought all of the lived experience people together for a group session, and we wanted to, we provided an overview of all of the work that we've just shown you that they had done, and then their role was to try to identify what the needs were and how they might meet those needs at those various touch points. So we were looking at, say, on the day of your loss or the day that you're advised of your loss, what were the key needs. And it was having compassionate and empathetic supports, regular and reactive supports, people who are informed and skilled at supporting people through suicide bereavement, people who have the ability to connect them to others or other services, people who are able to be non-judgmental and respectful, trauma-informed, suicide-informed. Debrief offered to anyone impacted, so it's not just about that inner circle, but to really be able to provide support to the whole myriad of people that are impacted by suicide. And someone to support families one step at a time, providing all the required information they do, practical support and access to a mentor figure. So things that were talked about as well were just really basic information that would have made somebody's experience that much easier, and years on is still causing pain, is things like knowing that I had the right to go to the coroner or the morgue. They told me I could go, but I didn't understand why. I needed information about what the purpose of going there was. I found that later that I could have done it. A friend has a mould made of her son's hand. I would have loved to have that done. So just having someone to help navigate that space when they're in that such intense pain and they're thrown into a situation that they have no prior knowledge of.
So then we talked to the lived experience co-design participants, and we talked then about how would your needs be best met following the days after you've been advised and before the funeral. One of the overriding comments was to take time to ask what I need and to listen. Someone to advise friends and family and coordinate support. Someone to help me prepare for the next steps and processes. As Bronnie said, it's for some people, it's an experience they've never been involved in before and had no knowledge of what even happens. A guidance to support me through decision making and practical things. Continuity from initial outreach team, practical help with things like children, food, coordination of friends, peer worker to help, someone who understands the different elements of a funeral and communicate with the funeral director. So one of the interesting comments was a central liaison point to manage everyone in the family, funeral directors, disseminate information, speak to people I couldn't speak to, advise friends, and perhaps someone in the form of a central caseworker. One of the other comments that was really poignant was to ask me what I need, take the time to ask and to listen.
Looking at the needs in those 2 to 3 weeks after the loss, people spoke about wanting to have a peer worker with lived experience to support and help navigate next steps. So someone who's walked that path before them. Practical things like someone to take kids to school, help get the little ones, feed the little ones throughout the night. The same support person that you can keep going back to, so someone that you can actually develop a relationship with. Someone to be physically present as you go through papers and navigate the process. So even though it's all that mundane paperwork, just having somebody there with you to support you as you do that. An advocate and mentor who knows the local services and can walk you through them. Properly trained peer workers with substantial knowledge about people's rights and entitlements. And someone to provide education to the workplace or the school for the parent and care about what's happened and how to support me or how to support my kids re-enter that school environment. And someone to be honest and let me know that it will be frustrating. Comments in terms of the school, someone to be my voice for me at school, educate the teachers how best to respond, what I needed from them, educate my friends and wider school. This is what's happened. This is how you can support your friend, and a central liaison point at school so that if something happened during the day, there was someone that had already been identified that child could go to immediately to get support. And wanting validation of my experience, talk to me about it.
So we then moved on to the touch point of meeting needs for people who have lost in the 4 to 6 months after the death. So in this particular context, the needs tended to shift from having to deal with the funeral and all of those immediate practical and emotional needs to things like ongoing support. So there were things that were mentioned like a connection to a range of supports to understand what's available, whether that be support groups, grief counselling, shared experience, clinical care, just whatever support was available. In the form, and then other supports in the form of education or skill building, compassion building based on the needs of the bereaved person. And peer matching was a common comment, that the person supporting was matched and had a similar experience or had understanding specific to that particular person. Flexible supports, a human connection around shared experience, psychologists with a grief and trauma experience. Someone mentioned that even as a minor, having some information regarding finances, information again around supports available, support from a regular provider, someone who was consistent, individualised supports, connections to clinical care, connection to sustainable services, a person-centred approach to rebuild with validation, having peer support workers with assist training. So a lot of what they were doing or talking about, was to do with support services primarily. And one of the comments that I'd like to read is continuity, to be able to sit down with someone. There's no time frame on grief, but too many of the services don't get funding next year and they're gone. So your support suddenly disappears. A lot of groups have been put together by individuals in the community trying to address the lack of services. So it's really about finding out about more support that's available within the community that is specific to the needs of people who are bereaved by suicide at that time.
The needs that people identified at the time of the anniversary, that 12 months and those other special dates throughout the year, and having a network of connections to fall back on around that anniversary and being able to connect with peers who've experienced the same thing. Having some information about how to let friends and families and colleagues know that an anniversary is approaching and what you might like to happen at that time to support you, and how to have open, meaningful conversations with friends and family, people wanting time and space to grieve, and the support to develop a self-care plan could be quite useful as well. Healing by reading other people's stories and lived experience, any way to help a person prepare and anticipate that an anniversary will hit differently to the grief they've felt so far. And that we all deal differently. The peer worker or mentor knows when the anniversaries are coming up and how you feel at that point in time. That personal connection is the big thing, to have someone around who knows you and what you're going through.
So we then spoke about meeting needs for people when with a lived experience when they're blindsided by emotion. And as we already mentioned, this can happen unexpectedly. And one of the common themes again was continuous support when needed. And we don't know when that is, but having someone there who has been in the same situation, who has got training to understand that these things can come out of the blue in order to validate, connect, and to find relief, and access to resources. So just continuity of support from someone who knows what it's like was really stressed. And then one of the comments, a service model that never ends. Someone can engage with it at any time, at any point of loss, and doesn't have to be a recent loss, was really important. And the other comment that was important, support from someone who has lost perhaps the same figure that they had lost. I had lost my child. I don't know what my other children need, having lost a sibling. So the needs being identified as being a little different depending on the relationship with the person that had died.
Next, we asked the group to start the thinking, and this is something that we'll continue on right throughout the co-design process, but to start thinking about what core values are going to be really important for the service. And obviously, this post-suicide support service is going to be led by Standby, Support After Suicide. It's in conjunction with Jesuit Social Services and Roses in the Ocean. All of those organisations have values, of course, that are our internal compass. They determine how we make decisions and how we live and breathe what we do. It's important for the service to have the same. And so whilst this is certainly not the final list, it's the beginning of. And so we'll be talking about this, as I said, right throughout in the community consultations as well. Probably no surprises there to everyone online. Top values being things like connection, compassion, hope and understanding, empathy, transparency, consistency, empowerment, being personal and flexible, respect, honesty and pragmatism. So there's a few ways that those comments have, or those suggestions have been unpacked there on the right-hand side. We'll leave those for you to read in the online survey, and we'd really love your contribution to this section as much as any other as well, so that we over time can sort of drill down to have a nice core set of values for this service. Okay, so then we went to our our group session of the health professionals working within various support services, some of them with Standby, some with Jesuit, some with Wellways and other organisations, individual peer workers and what have you. And we really wanted to understand from them now in terms of how can this service meet the needs that they have at these different touch points. So when we focused in on the day that they attended for the first time a family, or they're advised of the death of a suicide and connected with them, the key themes around needs was a designated case manager or central liaison point right from the beginning. Collaboration with other organisers providing a response, so that from the family's perspective, it's all very streamlined and there's a really nice safety net there. Strong connections and understanding between services. So a lot of relationship building that people are seeking in the different areas where the service is set up. Response informed by workers on the ground rather than management. So letting the people who actually go out to the families to really contribute and inform what the response needs to look like. Having adequate training, formal partnerships or written agreements with other organisations and first responders, and a really high level acknowledgement from government of the importance of postvention and the value of the services, and a way to disseminate that to high level organisation officials. So really looking for real validation and support that this type of work is so critical, and for the people who work in this space to be acknowledged for the work that they do is the message that came through. And police officers being aware of the available support programs, so that they are often first on the scene. What information that's going to be really helpful to the people who are bereaved, how can they get that to those people and be knowledgeable themselves? Acknowledgement of the importance of the role of peer workers. It's a profession in itself. External organisations need to understand first responders' culture to work together. And it's not just about the individual service, it's about the others that support it and how it feeds back into others to support individuals and community.
So we then went on to talk about the immediate weeks following the suicide, and one of the common sort of theme at this particular period of time was really communication between the services that were available and understanding the role within the service and within the network of services, exactly what could be offered, and those relationships being developed between the services in order to provide really good communication and understanding of what was actually going on and what support could be provided. Ongoing service improvement to fit the family needs, internal assessments of additional services, and ensuring that staff are educated about what services are available within their particular areas. So I'm going to read the three comments because they're really quite important. Communication between services, to be clear about our roles and what each service provides, so we know who to refer to, where they're coming from, and so we're not overlapping. Confidence that the service that you are referring to is safe, and finally, the opportunity to be able to reflect about situations and a way to immediately address those if something isn't working for the family. So there's that need for continual real-time improvement of the service that's being provided in those weeks following.
At the 12-month mark after the suicide loss, having flexibility to offer different kinds of support. So being able to let them know, for example, about a local support group, just calling them so that they know that you're there. Others have talked about sending cards. So assistance in navigating what the family may need, having someone that the bereavement worker can actually speak to, and having the flexibility to be able to have organic as well as formal opportunities to debrief. Understanding which services the family has accessed and what the next steps are. So there was conversation around, sometimes they'll do their initial work and they will be connected onto other services, but then there's not necessarily clarity over exactly what do those families say yes to and actually move forward with. So somehow having a connection and clarity around who has had what supports so that you can go in being very informed. So comments around an open door policy with someone you can call and get reassurance that you've done all you can do. And some people get very attached to one service. It might not want to be contacted by another service. Some way of being mindful of that. So really, once again, putting the people who are bereaved at the centre in terms of listening to them, asking them what they need, and then being able to respond accordingly. So the other two areas that you'll probably recall, there's been a lot of information we've shared from the focus group conversations, were times when post-intervention workers were blindsided by emotion themselves, and the other one was around where their work life and personal life intersect. We actually did not get enough time to explore this in the detail that we want to with the post-intervention workers. So this is going to be an opportunity for everyone who participated in those workshops, but also everybody else who decides to contribute through the online survey. We really welcome your suggestions in this space, and we'll take it through to the face-to-face consultations as well. So that's those two final areas. So, as I said, that's an enormous amount of information for you to absorb in just over 3/4 of an hour. The feedback loop will be open on the 24th, and access of the Survey Monkey is through this link here. We will make sure that this information is on the Roses in the Ocean website. The feedback loop, all of this info will also be sent out to everybody who has participated so far, as well as people who had also expressed a real interest in being involved but just weren't able to be because of numbers limitations when it's in an online situation. So everyone will be emailed this, but please circulate it to any other people that you know that work in the space or that have a lived experience of suicide bereavement, because the more voices that we hear from, the better that this co-design will be. The feedback loop closes on the 3rd of March, so you've got quite a number of days to have time to complete that. We'll then move to a combined session on the 9th of March, which will be a group of 10 people. 5 of them will be people who work in the post-intervention space, 5 people with lived experience of suicide. We're just drawing those from the groups that have already participated to date. And then we will move, as I said, to a number of face-to-face consultations in New South Wales in various areas. So thank you all so very, very much. I'm going to stop sharing our screen briefly now so that Lindy and I can come back to view. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Please make sure you complete that online survey and circulate it to everyone you know who would be interested. And we look forward to continuing this fabulous work. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.